This hangout is on air and it is live, and welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Audible Live, footballguys.com podcast. Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, Gene Bramall, the Thursday show that you know and you love. We're here to talk about fantasy football with you and break it down better than anybody else. Sigmund Bloom, you still haven't answered what you're wearing tonight, brother.
Yeah, this is Via 313, Detroit-style pizza here in Austin, Texas. And if you're in Austin and you don't get Via 313, then, demerits for you. It's the best. And I'm always happy to support friends. And certainly there's going to be a brick and mortar opening, so I'm taking advantage of this. Not an official sponsor of the Audible yet.
But do a live read. I want you to do an impromptu live read for Via 313, Bloom.
Right. Have you ever heard of Detroit-style pizza? What? Exactly. You need to find out what Detroit-style pizza is. Believe it or not, the same pans you use to shuffle around parts on Detroit assembly lines are now used to bring delicious pizza straight to your lips. From the Via 313 trailers. Six and Waller, Violet Crown, or on Rainy Street behind Craft Pride, the best beer bar in Austin. Via 313, ask for the Detroiter.
Wow. That's amazing. That was awesome. That's a true professional. Matt Waldman, now you need to grade him.
No, I need to grade him, huh? I think we'll give him an A for that one for sure. Absolutely. Especially since there's no oil in the pizza, like motor oil.
Nope.
Then we're good to go.
Yeah.
and if there is, I bet it even tastes good because I've seen pictures of that stuff on Facebook. It looks pretty darn good.
Matt, we need your championship belt to make an appearance at some point during this program.
We do, but he's walked off. He's having a battle royal on his own, I think, with a squirrel. So
Jimmy Garoppolo, he'll be back. Speaking of squirrels, squirrel.
on the ground.
It's Dr. Gene Bramall joining the program. Gene, what's up tonight, baby?
Not too much. It's been a busy week for sure.
Busy week in the National Football League as we get to week 2 from around the NFL. Now, the Audible Live is brought to you by FanDuel.com. How'd you do last week in your fantasy leagues? Did you win some cash? No. Oh, princess, don't make that mistake again. Check out FanDuel.com, the best for 1 week fantasy football leagues. FanDuel.com, giving away over $10 million weekly in contests that just the entry fees start at just $1. You can play whenever you want, as much as you want. It's simply fantastic. So make sure to check out FanDuel.com for all of your weekly fantasy football needs. That's FanDuel.com. Sign up today. It is the Audible Live, and we're going to start with some injury news and notes, of course, with Dr. Gene Bramall. Gene, you will bow out for just a little bit and then get back with us to do our Twitter questions. Hashtag Audible Live if you're watching us right now. And we've got, of course, see, this is why Bloom looks like this, the thinker, because the Steelers are on. And the Steelers and Ravens are on. So quickly before we get to Dr. Gene Bloom, give us the update. Antonio Brown knocked out but came back.
Right. Apparently, if you're really important to the team, you can come back from a concussion. We'll see. Steelers come out, and Roethlisberger moves the ball for like 8 minutes. Nothing comes of it. And then the Steelers' offense starts to fizzle out. Ravens put up some points. Steelers' offense comes back and does well. Marcus Wheaton looks great. Marcus Wheaton is going to remain a big part of this offense. It seems to be a concerted effort to get the ball in his hands. Roethlisberger looks good in the hurry-up. Le'Veon Bell still looks incredible. Again, for drafting today, Le'Veon Bell's a top 6, top 8 pick. And I started a great conversation on Twitter. It's really hard to pick a good compare for this new and improved Le'Veon Bell. That's the thing. He's a different back, and he's a good player to jump off to any number of discussions about how players change and evolve once they get in the NFL. On the Baltimore side, the running game still sucks. Flacco has had moments where he's in the comfort zone. He still is favoring Steve Smith for sure. We're seeing Owen Daniels and Dennis Pitta rack up some catches. Owen Daniels is actually looking better than he did at any point last year, and not looking like a guy that had one foot in the grave that we were hearing about. Torrey Smith is on the milk carton, and that's maybe the biggest thing coming out of this Baltimore offense right now. For the second week in a row, he has 1 catch, but Flacco's not really looking to him, and especially not downfield.
That's the Steelers and Ravens game going on right now on NFL Network. We'll keep you abreast of everything that's going on. And if we start cheering...
It's because you said abreast.
Yes, and please forgive us for cheering. No cheering in the press box. Well, this ain't the press box. It's the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. And Le'Veon Bell jumping over small children with a single bound. It's what he does. I still get worried about that because I was telling Matt before the show, I was like, I still think of Priest Holmes. Obviously we got the great images of Walter Payton skying over the goal line, and that's awesome in NFL history. But I think of Priest Holmes trying to do the same thing at the goal line, never quite being the same after that injury. So what goes up must come down. But Bell's looking fantastic. And Wheaton, you mentioned it. We talked about it in the recap show, Bloom. The kid's clutch. You need to move those chains. You need to move those sticks. You're not going to Justin Brown. You don't want him to fumble again. You're going to Marcus Wheaton. And we're seeing it unfold tonight on NFL Network. Dr. Gene Bramall, of course, you follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall. And check out Bramall's Second Opinion, everything he does at footballguys.com. Dr. Gene, we jump into the injury news, and one thing that is standing out to me is, of course, what we saw from Andre Ellington. And again, you look at the newswire today, practice reports come through, you say, okay, Andre Ellington not going out of practice because of that foot injury. It's Thursday, it's not Friday. Friday out is different from Thursday out. But is this kind of the new normal with Andre Ellington? Quite frankly, Dr. Gene, I was surprised that he played. I was surprised that he got as large of a workload as he did last week with this foot injury. So is this the new normal with Ellington, where every Thursday I'm going to be commenting on, well, here we go again, but he'll practice Friday and he'll play Sunday?
Yeah, I think we're probably not going to know the answer to that for sure until Sunday. I think that it's probably the new norm, but I'll freely admit that I'm not exactly sure at all what's going on with Andre Ellington right now. We were told that he was going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. He saw 3 foot specialists. Jay Glazer, who's usually dead on with his injury information when he decides to put something out there, it's on, says he's got a tear in the tendon of his foot. And then Andre Ellington played anyway, and I didn't think he looked that bad on Monday night, but back in a boot today, from the boot to the bike, that's pretty good progression there. Hopefully we'll see him at a limited practice and be ready to go on Sunday. I think the Cardinals are probably trying to manage him to get him through their Week 4 bye week in the hopes that, let him play a little bit, nothing happens, he gets 2 good weeks off to continue to let that foot coil off, and everything heals up by then. But like I said, I wouldn't say skeptical at this point, but I still think there's reason to be concerned until we see him look like his usual self and practice as he usually might.
And Owen Daniels, everybody. The correct answer was Owen Daniels with 5 catches and 2 touchdowns tonight. Steelers are down 17-6. Right, Gene. Sunday night, Chicago's playing. We don't know yet whether Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey are playing. We will get
we do.
some. Oh, well,
I think we do.
Go ahead.
I think we do. I've been skeptical about Alshon Jeffrey. Yes, I know that Mark Trestman said that he was on the bike, he was able to come in if we needed him, but it was a close game all the way from the third quarter through the fourth quarter through overtime. I think if Alshon Jeffrey was able to play, he would have been in that game. We've not heard him speak to the media at all. He's not practiced at all on Wednesday or Thursday. Mark Trestman didn't have much more to say today, but he did say he wasn't sure if Jeffrey was even going to be able to test his hamstring tomorrow. I'm hopeful that we'll see him do a limited practice tomorrow and maybe on Saturday, and we'll have some sense that maybe he's a game time decision. But I don't think it's likely at all that Jeffrey plays. I'm more concerned about, is he going to practice next Wednesday than am I concerned if he's going to practice tomorrow, because I think that's going to tell us whether or not this is a multi-week injury or not. So if you've got Alshon Jeffrey, I would work under the assumption that he's not going to play Monday. I don't think that's the case with Brandon Marshall. Looking at his injury on video replay didn't look all that concerning. I think they're just treating him conservatively. Brandon Marshall was talking to the media today. He had more to say about Jeffrey than himself. I think it sounds like he's expected to play. My expectation is that we'll see him practice tomorrow, and I think he'll be good to go on Monday night.
Gene, apparently this cat is worried about a former dog in Cincinnati, so if you can tell me a little bit more about A.J. Green and his injury and whether or not it's serious enough for fantasy owners to be worried.
Well, I think we have to be worried about it simply because he was limited yesterday and then didn't practice at all today. I'm not sure yet this year exactly what the Bengals' usual practice participation through the week is. I'm not sure if Thursday is their big day or if Wednesday is their big day. Usually teams will have one padded practice a week and then one important walkthrough. And once we get some sense of which day is which, we'll know which day is more likely to be a veteran rest day and which day is not. So I was a little bit concerned with that, what looked like a downgrade in practice participation today, until Hugh Jackson said he told the media that he's just a little bit sore. Now, we can't really ever trust exactly what Cincinnati says about their player injuries, so I want to see what A.J. Green does in practice tomorrow and see what they have to say about him on Saturday. But for now, I think there wasn't any specific injury that we're aware of that happened last week, and even though his practice participation was a little bit worse today, most signs are positive for now, and hopefully that'll be the case, and we'll see him play on Sunday.
Talking fantasy football and talking injuries with Dr. Gene Bramall from footballguys.com, at Gene Bramall, as we send it around the horn again, and let's stick in Ohio with Cleveland and Jordan Cameron in the shoulder injury. Now, latest news that we got, missed his second practice of the week, a no-go today on Thursday, September 11th, and it's looking more and more likely that he won't suit up in Week 2 against the Saints, dealing with the strained AC joint in his right shoulder after initially injuring it in the preseason. Fantasy owners better have a backup plan here, Dr. Gene.
Yeah, I think so. He didn't practice today. He didn't practice yesterday. That's not a great sign. Cameron is the type of guy who could potentially get in a limited practice tomorrow, be called a game-time decision for Sunday, and still play. I don't know that I would handicap those odds as being in Cameron's favor tonight, but it's possible that that could be the case. I think the more interesting question is, especially if he doesn't play this week, or maybe even if he does and risk another tweak and aggravation, is this something that's going to linger for him from week to week? Is it something that we'll see crop up in Week 5, Week 7, Week 10? It's an injury that a lot of players can play through, and I know Cameron didn't play through it effectively last week at all. He came out, tried to give it a go on the sidelines, and wasn't able to get back in. But between some padding and some pain-killing injections, maybe even a cortisone shot, usually players can get through this well enough without having to come out of the game. But the MRI was apparently not showing anything that seems a little bit worse. That's a good sign. But the first time Cameron was injured was way back in the beginning of August. Took a couple of weeks off, has played 4 weeks in a row, including the last 3 weeks of the preseason, and then has this injury. So the question is, was it still lingering there a little bit and he fell on it in just the right way, or did he really get better and then go through this again? And either way, I think it's a legitimate question to ask. Are there going to be times where he's going to need to come out of the game? Are there going to be weeks in the future where this limits him a little bit more? This isn't, because of the area that it is, it's really not an injury that's likely to be made worse unless he lands on it in just the right way. But it is something that could limit his range of motion, could cause some pain, might cause him to miss some snaps. So it may be better in the long term for him to miss this week. So if that happens and you're his fantasy owner, wouldn't be too concerned about that. It's more likely that he'll play in Week 3 than not, even if that happens based on what we know. But if he does, be prepared that he may not take his usual number of snaps.
Okay, Gene, I feel like this is a bit of an unfair advantage for everyone listening to you, Football Guy subscribers. In this case, you don't have to be a Football Guy subscriber to be watching or listening right now. Toby Gerhart, you had a bit of a revelation about the nature of his ankle injury, and I guess I have a follow-up question to that when you reveal what you revealed earlier on Twitter. Should we factor into the analysis here the style of player that Toby Gerhart is? That he is a rugged, straight line-ish guy. Is high ankle sprain? Oh, I just let it out. Is high ankle sprain the kind of injury? Yeah. Is that the kind of injury that it really doesn't matter, or can playing style minimize the amount that it limits you? And particularly what I'm saying is, if you're deciding whether to play Toby Gerhart this week, how much should it factor in your decision?
Well, I think it has to factor in a little bit. Yes, when I had a chance to look at that injury a little bit more closely last night as I was writing up the Wednesday injury reports, and it's a pretty typical mechanism for a high ankle sprain. Now, we've seen players get their foot caught and turned in that direction. They still end up. Some players we've heard, Jimmy Graham being one that comes to mind a couple of years ago. Nobody really ever said it was a high ankle sprain, and maybe that it was twisted just a way that it's not. People always say, well, we heard about it with Roddy White, we heard about it with C.J. Spiller. How can he have a high ankle sprain and still finish the game? Well, it takes some time for the inflammation to get there if it's a low or a mid-grade sprain, and there's some adrenaline in the work. So oftentimes, if you keep the joint warm and you tape it up in the correct way, they can get through that particular game, but then the swelling starts, the inflammation kicks in, and because of the way that ligament is between the two lower leg bones there, it can be a much bigger problem 24 to 48 hours afterwards and 2 to 3 weeks afterwards as it is in those first 20 to 30 minutes after the injury. So even though he finished the game and even though he was able to get to a limited practice today, that doesn't mean necessarily that he doesn't have a high ankle sprain. It also doesn't mean a high ankle sprain. You'd always used to say it's 3 to 4 weeks he'll be out no matter what. That's not necessarily the case either, because low-grade injuries are low-grade injuries. It's a little bit more difficult to come back from, but it is possible that he can play this week. So question number one, even before we get to whether or not Gerhart's game is going to be effective or not, is whether or not he's going to play this week. And I think if he's back on the practice field tomorrow, whether or not he increases from limited or not, I think that's possible that he can. And then and that's where I think your question about the type of player Gerhart is comes into play, because most of what, it's going to put a lot of stress on that foot when he tries to cut to the outside and then come back in. Any twisting motion of the lower leg is where it's going to be an issue. So yes, if all he does is run straight line, it may not be a major issue for him. But I don't think you could say that for any running back, even in a power scheme, even a player like Toby Gerhart. I think it's likely for him to be limited. So then the question becomes, does this look a little bit more like Andre Johnson did 3 or 4 years ago, where he was maybe a little bit limited and then looked really good after that? Or are we looking at a situation like a Roddy White, like a C.J. Spiller last year, where he tries to play through the injury because of his pain tolerance and some pain-killing injections, and he's able to get back on the field, but he's nowhere near the player he would have been if not? And that's a very difficult question to answer until we see him on the field. But yes, I would downgrade him at least a tier this week. I'm still not fully convinced that we'll see him on Sunday. I think it's going to depend on how his ankle responded to today's limited work and whether or not he gets back on the practice field tomorrow, Friday.
Gene, I care 2 cents about pop culture, but I do have to ask if Doug Martin is going the way of the Dougie, or is the Dougie an iconic dance, and is it going to be one that's going to be sticking around for a while?
I'm not going to do any dancing. I got up on the table last night. Of course, that was just audio. It wasn't video, but I was up on the table here for Ezekiel Ansah, but I'm not going to do any dancing tonight. I think Doug Martin is fine. That was one of the rare situations where the TV replay gave us a good indication of what might be going on, because it showed us what the trainers, the athletic trainers and the sideline docs were looking at him specifically on the exam table, and they were kind of pushing across the top of his shin bone. Usually that means it's in the area of a bone bruise. Sometimes you're looking at meniscal cartilage in that sort of situation, but then they took him back for an x-ray. So I think they were trying to make sure that he didn't have any bony injury there, and then they cleared him to return. He didn't finish the game necessarily, but he was in and out. So I think we're probably dealing with a bone bruise there. Those are things that can be played through. Martin was back on the practice field on Thursday. I think it's likely he's going to be good to go. Whether or not he's going to be effective or whether we start seeing more Bobby Rainey is another issue entirely, be it because Doug Martin's been ineffective running the ball, they're concerned that he won't be able to hold off with this bone bruise, or the blitz pickup stuff that we were hearing about on Twitter today that Lovie Smith eventually denied. Those are all factors, but I think from an injury perspective, Martin is likely to play this week.
It is the Audible Live every Thursday night, talking injuries with Dr. Gene Bramall, talking fantasy football with you. Thanks, everyone, for watching and for tuning in. And let's go to Oakland, or let's say we did anyway. Oakland Raiders running back Maurice Jones-Drew did not practice on Thursday, September 11th, because he underwent surgery on his right hand. Now, while we're watching Steve Smith do a thing or two, we saw Antonio Gates in week 1 do a thing or two. We know that there's some older players still playing it, certainly a fairly high level. Reggie Wayne springs to mind. MJD, not so much in the Raiders offense. Now with this hand surgery, how should fantasy owners navigate this, Dr. Gene?
Well, I don't think MJD is going to play this week. I'm not sure what procedure he had. There was a report that he had a broken hand, and that's what the surgery was for. Jones-Drew denied that today. The beat writer who had that is sticking by his source and still believes that it's a broken hand. I'm not so sure. What they said he had in the locker room was a lot of hand swelling and a small bandage just in the back of his hand there behind his finger, without a splint, without a cast. And if he had a pin put in, he'd have at least some sort of splint. If not a cast, I think he'd be immobilized. So was it some sort of an infectious procedure he had done? Did he need something drained? Was there a cyst there? Is it potentially a tendon procedure? Again, I think that would be splinted. I'm not sure, but Jones-Drew seemed very pessimistic for him in the locker room. Usually he's a guy that says, I'm going to play, and he said today that he wanted to make sure he was right for the rest of the season, but he would try to get out there. That, to me, suggests that he's not going this week. Now, if it's a broken bone, A lot of it is going to depend on how much he can use his hand to carry, catch, block, all the things that running backs need to do. So if he misses this week, it may not be until Wednesday or Thursday of next week until we know for sure whether it's just a 1 week absence or it's something more along the lines of a 2 to 4 week absence. Hopefully, after everything runs its course this week and we get the post-game press conferences and the early week press conferences next week, we'll get a little bit more information about specifically what his injury is and what he had done, and we'll have a little bit more to go from there. But I think it's going to be Darren McFadden this week for the Raiders.
Gene, I don't know when knee comes up in the hokey pokey. I think it's like third or fourth, but it was first this year for Ben Tate. What do we know? What do we know? And what can we do as far as holding on to Tate? Is it worth holding on to Tate through this as we add yet another pockmark, another black mark to his record?
Yeah, and I think, to lead into this, and I didn't really make a big point of it with the Alshon Jeffrey situation, but even though we're not getting a whole lot of injury information, I still think there are subtle clues in what players say, in what coaches say, and what we can see on replay. No, we don't have access to all of the exam data or the imaging data. We don't really know what's going on in the locker room, so trying to read between the lines can sometimes be difficult when we're dealing with more incomplete information than ever, because lots of these coaches on Monday were not giving anything out, and Mike Pettin was one of those. So I took a little bit of grief on Twitter on Tuesday night when I said, Ben Tate saying that it's not so serious and he'll be okay. That's not necessarily a reassuring thing. When you hear not that serious, to me, I read that as, well, no, I don't have an ACL, but there's something going on here. Thanks for your concern. And that's what it turned out to be. I don't think that we know yet, and I haven't seen anything, and that things happened too quickly, and there was only one video angle on the replay to know which one of his ligaments it is, whether it's an MCL, PCL, or LCL. But it's the early report from Ian Rappaport suggested that it's going to be kind of a 2 to 4 week absence. With any of those ligaments, it's really hard to put a timetable on when a running back in particular comes back, because it depends on two things. First, it depends on what the team doctors see on his exam. If there's any looseness in the knee joint, it's not something that's easy to just brace and put out there, and put him back on the field. So if they're still seeing some looseness in his knee joint at week 2, week 3, even if it's a very low-grade ligament sprain, he's not coming back. And then Ben Tate has to feel like there's no looseness in his knee. He's got to feel comfortable cutting at speed. Both of those things have to happen. So when we hear, if we're already here that it's an MCL sprain next Monday, for instance, those things, it can be 1 week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 4, 5, or 6. It's just really hard to know which way things are going to go. To answer the question, would I hold on to him? I think that depends a lot on what you think of Terrence West and how Isaiah Crowell looks this weekend. If Crowell looks great, he looks like the potential foundation back. Terrence West isn't doing good, or Terrence West does well. If they've got another option there instead of Ben Tate, it's a little bit longer for them to hold him out until he's fully healed, and it's a little bit longer for this to be more of a timeshare, 2-headed or 3-headed running back by committee when he does come back. So unless you're convinced that Ben Tate is a running back too when he comes back, and if there's somebody better on the waiver wire, then I think I'd go ahead and make that move. Otherwise, if you're in a little bit deeper league, you've got some room to carry him. It's still a nice offensive line there. Ben Tate had clearly won this job, an every down job, over Terrence West and Isaiah Crowell going into week 1, so it could very well go back to that when we come out of the bye week. And I think the Browns have a week 4 bye, so if I had to guess today, I don't think we're seeing Ben Tate until week 5. I think it's unlikely that we'll see him return in 2 weeks, and it just doesn't make much sense to not give him those extra 2 weeks to recover. So expect to see Ben Tate in week 5, and hopefully not too much later than that.
So, Gene, we're watching this Baltimore game, and I'm getting a feeling that in Pittsburgh language, Steve Smith Sr. translates to face mask me on every run after the catch. But Smith had a play where basically they had a miscommunication with Flacco, and it reminded me of him in Carolina saying to Jake Delhomme, basically, Jake, I love you. You're my boy, but you're dumb as a box of rocks. So I'm wondering here, his last quarterback before Joe Flacco, who was probably a couple boulders shy of Delhomme in some cases, probably to Smith right now, is except I guess he made up for it on that slant, is Cam Newton. Let's talk a little bit about Cam Newton's injury, whether or not he's now going to be able to run into the huddle actually in pads, or whether or not he's going to be coming in on the sideline and arguing with referees, or maybe taking the flag out of the coach's pocket this weekend and throwing that out there when there's an iffy play that they want to contest.
Yeah, Cam Newton is going to play this weekend, but if I were Cam Newton and I had a painful rib condition and I knew I was going to have to get padded, I would not be antagonizing Ndamukong Suh this week or any of the Detroit Lions defensive line. So I'm not hearing anything that makes me think he's not going to play. And again, I still believe that, yes, there's going to be some interval healing over these next 7 days, and yes, they prevented him from taking a hit last Sunday, but I still think this had much more to do with the game plan with an injured Cam Newton than whether or not they were seriously worried about his rib cage being worse. If Cam Newton could have done everything more than what Derek Anderson was able to do last week, if he could have run the read option, if he could have scrambled when he needed to, if he could have thrown balls down the field, I think he would have played. So it was pretty telling to me that they made that decision pretty much early Monday that Cam Newton was going to be able to play. What's different on Monday than Sunday morning or Friday after practice? I'm not sure what was much different in those 48 hours, knowing that you've still got another week of practice to prepare to with Cam Newton. I think it was all game plan. I think hopefully that means that extra week, Cam Newton is going to be much more comfortable with whatever padding he's wearing and doing what he needs to do on the field.
Talking football and fantasy football and injuries with Dr. Gene Bramall. Follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall. Looks like we got a couple of more times to go around the horn, so let's go down to Tampa and talk about Austin Seferian-Jenkins, the big talented rookie tight end, now with the ankle injury, did not practice. What have you dug up here on ASJ?
Yeah, I think in the way he was doubled up back, and if you slow motion that replay up a little bit, you can actually see his foot on the other side of the player that's laying on top of his legs. It's hard to tell specifically, but that's a pretty typical mechanism of a high ankle sprain as well. He was in a boot. I got a few questions this week about whether or not this might have any connection to the broken foot and the surgical procedure he had around draft time this year. I don't think that's the case. I think this is an ankle issue, and I think it's a high ankle issue. Unlike what we're seeing with Toby Gerhart, since Seferian-Jenkins is not back on the practice field, this may be one of those injuries that takes a good 3 to 4 weeks for him to come back from. Hopefully that's not the case. It's another situation, though, where let's wait and see what his practice participation looks like next week before we say for certain.
Gene, football players are not injury-prone in the sense of the word, the way it is used, but we're talking about Ben Tate and we're talking about Jordan Reed. Now, it's a hamstring for Reed. We've heard things to have downplayed the severity of it, but we also knew early this week that he wasn't going to play. So should we be optimistic or pessimistic about Reed returning, say, week 3, week 4?
I'm a little bit pessimistic today just because they ruled him out so early. And the way this hamstring injury happened was a little bit different than the typical wide receiver, running back, whoever sprinting down the field, blows out a tire, reaches for the back of the hamstring, and hobbles off the field. Jordan Reed was tackled, and his leg kind of doubled up back behind him, and his knee hyperextended. And when that happened, his hamstring got stretched. He tried to get up from that, and he didn't seem like he even felt anything go. But when he took a step, that was when he noticed that there was something wrong, and he knew right away. He reached in the middle of the hamstring, so I don't know that it's a low hamstring by the tendon that tends to linger a little bit, and there really isn't necessarily something about that particular mechanism that's going to make it more likely for him to be out a little bit longer. But I think what we're hearing from Jay Gruden, what we heard from Robert Griffin III, makes it seem like it's a borderline grade 1-2 injury, and those things it's always best to consider them 2 to 4 week injuries. And my default, and this goes for Alshon Jeffrey too, is if he's not able to get back on the practice field at all within 10 days, then I think it's going to take him a week to condition, a week to recover during practice before he comes back. So if Jeffrey and Reed are not practicing next Wednesday and Thursday, it may be week 4 that we see them come back, even if they're practicing in the lead up to week 3. So that's kind of where I am with Reed right now. Hopefully he's back to practice next week, but I think that's the next time that we're going to get any meaningful information from him.
Well, let's go to Atlanta and talk a little bit about a play that happened at the end of the first half against the Saints. That was probably one of the more interesting plays of the week when it comes to injuries, because on this play, Matt Ryan drops back to pass and pressure comes in from the outside that Jake Matthews, the rookie left tackle, basically collapses inside and suffers a high ankle sprain. as Ryan rolls to the left, throws downfield, and finds Roddy White about 39 yards downfield, where he makes a leaping grab, falls backwards, hits his head, and the broadcast crew thinks he has a concussion, but it's the fact that he's limping off the field that it was the bigger sign, because he got kicked in the back of the leg, and he came back and played, but he did say in the media that he was actually pretty concerned about the injury, and that it was a knee injury at first that he was concerned about, but he seems to be feeling really good. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that knee injury might be, where you get kicked in the back of the knee like that?
Well, he's got something going on in the knee, and I know that's kind of general speaking, but it's hard to know exactly what it is. It's swelling inside the knee. That can happen when you bang your knee on the ground, when you get kicked from behind. Anything that irritates the knee can cause a little bit of swelling. It's a situation where it's a knee that he had drained back in May after he fell hard on it in OTAs. I'm not aware that he's had any chronic knee conditions, but so it could be, is it a cartilage issue? Is it a bursa sac issue? Is it just general wear and tear? It's hard to know. I was a little bit reassured when Roddy White said that he didn't need an MRI for this, and he has been back to practice today. So I think he's going to play, but the concern here would be he's a tough guy. He's going to play through lots of things. We saw him try to play through this high ankle sprain all the way through last year. He only missed 5 snaps last week. But is this a situation where he's going to come off the field repeatedly? Is he going to need to miss practice? Will he need to be drained at some point? If it is a cartilage thing, is it an MRI issue? Is there something going to need surgical intervention down the line? All of those are questions that we need to have in the back of our minds. But I still think as long as Roddy White is on the field and with all the weapons they have around him right now, between some good stuff that's going on in the running game and Julio Jones, routes that Roddy runs, I think he can probably still run if his knee is bothering him a little bit. So what's going to be the telltale sign for me is I'm okay if he misses practice on Wednesday, if he's a little bit limited on Thursday. But what Roddy White told us last year, that when you see me fully practice on the practice participation report, that's when you know I'm good to go. So if he's still limited tomorrow, that's a red flag for me. If he's limited in the future, that's a red flag for me. So Roddy has told us in the past how to read his practice participation reports. So I'm going to go on that again this year until we figure out otherwise.
Reggie Bush discussion next with Dr. Gene Bramall from FootballGuys.com. Now, it had a scare. Fantasy owners were aghast. Reggie Bush had ice on his knee. Dave Burkett, Detroit Free Press, put this out on Twitter, was seen hobbling through the locker room, could have just been sore, with a bag of ice on his knee. Why wasn't it a steak? Reggie Bush then, doesn't do all the drills. The next news item we had, and then today, well, he practiced in full, and we didn't hear anything about ice on Bush's knee or anything like that. So, in this split already with Joik Bell, with the ice and the hobbling, again, could just be sore. How much should fantasy owners be concerned when setting that lineup and you put the cursor over and you're like, I ice on the knee, but he practiced in full on Thursday, Dr. Gene?
Yeah. So I think the reason to be concerned is because Joik Bell is such a good option. So if Reggie Bush is ineffective or if he's not feeling as good as he expects to during the game, Joik Bell can do, well, not everything that Reggie Bush can do, but he can be effective on passing downs. He can run the ball between the tackles and outside the tackles on early downs. So they've got a guy there that can do, we're not deciding between Arian Foster and Jonathan Grimes, so to speak. So I think if Bush isn't 100% or if he's ineffective, then Joik Bell comes in. Reggie Bush has had issues with his knees, both of them, for years, so it's not that big a concern to see him through the locker room with a big ice pack on. That's just maintenance, and that's not all that unusual for a veteran player who's got some wear and tear on those knees. It's a very good sign that he was able to get back to a full practice just 24 hours later. I'd expect him, assuming that he didn't have any setbacks and his knee responded well to the practice today, him to practice on Friday and be able to play. But I do think that it's a concern because it could cost him anywhere between 5 to 10 touches if they feel like Joik Bell is looking better on the field.
Gene, looks like the suspense is going to be released from whether Eddie Lacy is going to play, but we still have to check in on his status for the rest of the year. I mean, we know, he's going to play this week and he's in until we hear he's not, but he had a concussion week 1 this year, week 2 last year. There's a hit that has been going around from the Texas A&M game, which I believe was in late November of 2012, where it certainly looked like he might have been concussed. We don't have good information from the NCAA on that. But whether it's 2 or 3, should we be concerned, Or should the fact that he's on track to play 10 days after his concussion mean that for all intents and purposes, you treat Lacy basically like you did going into the season?
I think you can treat him as you did going into the season, but I also think if there are any other concussions in the next 4 to 6 weeks, that he's likely to be held out a little bit longer. They definitely had the benefit of the doubt with those 3 extra days. It looks like he saw the independent cardiologist sometime yesterday and was cleared for a full padded practice today. So I don't think there's much doubt, and Mike McCarthy pretty much said as much, that he's going to play on Sunday, assuming that he doesn't have any other recurrence of symptoms between today and Sunday. Whether or not every concussion's a little bit different. Yes, we think that people who have had multiple concussions in the past are a little bit more prone to having concussions in the future. Not exactly sure why that is, but it seems to be the case, whether it's an anatomic issue or just the fact that those players put their body in that position a little bit more often. And I do think we've seen with guys in Lacy situations, multiple concussions, certainly multiple concussions within the same playing season often warrant him being out a little bit more. But his quick recovery this year is a good sign, and I think that it's not a panic situation for me where you talked about Le'Veon Bell. I think Eddie Lacy is kind of in that same category, even with the Green Bay offensive line struggles. I think he's right there just outside the elite tier. So if you can get that caliber player and who's got a little bit less risk to him from an injury perspective, from a concussion perspective, sure, try to lock that in. But I wouldn't be looking to panic and take 75 cents on the dollar for Eddie Lacy because of his history.
Gene, let's have an update on Kenny Stills' quad injury that he re-injured in August and hasn't played week 1. He's practiced on a limited basis this week. Can you tell us a little bit about that quad injury and what you would expect moving forward?
Yeah, Stills is optimistic in the locker room. He was optimistic last week. He was definitely optimistic today. He's increased his practice participation this week in comparison to last week when he wasn't doing that much. Got in 2 consecutive limited practices Wednesday and Thursday. There's a chance that he may increase a little bit more tomorrow or do enough to convince Sean Payton that he's good to go. I don't think you're going to see him take a huge snap count if he plays, but I think it's possible. If he's not returning this week, I think there's a very good chance, based on what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, that he does return in week 3.
And he's Dr. Gene Bramall, footballguys.com, at Gene Bramall on Twitter. Make sure to check him out and to ask a bunch of questions on Twitter. And to be nice on Twitter, right, Dr. Gene?
Always. Just be nice everywhere.
Be kind, because it feels so good just to be kind. Dr. Gene, before we let you out of here, does it seem like there's just more injuries? I mean, my God, it's week 1. And more Dr. Gene is always a great recipe for success. But doesn't it seem like there's just more, top-name guys getting at least a little banged up now?
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the defensive side of the ball. There were 4 defensive players, significant defensive players that are done for the year after last week, and one other, Chris Long, who went on the injured reserve with a designated return, as did Tyler Eifert, by the way. I think definitely more injuries this week, because the number of players that I was trying to track down was more than I could remember having a list on Wednesday to put together. But I also think there's a little bit relative. Last year during the preseason, we were talking about, is this the year of the ACL? What's going on with the Liz Frank injuries? How come everybody's getting hurt? And we were trying to decide, is it because they increased the roster size to 90, or is it because the level of play between the top 10 guys on the roster and the bottom 10 guys on the roster puts the guys in the middle at risk? That really didn't happen this year. It was relatively quiet, and I don't like using the Q word, but it was relatively quiet throughout the preseason. So, maybe just the law of averages. We saw a lot of guys hurt last year too. It was a higher than average normal in week 1. Hopefully that means we don't see nearly as many guys dinged up in week 2.
And something about Jacksonville and those soft tissue injuries. Quickly, Dr. Gene, you and I have talked about this on my show. I believe we might have talked about this about a year ago on this show. The body becoming callous, essentially, to getting hit. I mean, in a way, is the new, collective bargaining agreement, which isn't so new, 2011, but still, and the reduced numbers of practices where you're hitting, while it's all nice and well, your body doesn't get conditioned to get, because there's something, when you talk about football shape is not just, hey, I can run a bunch of wind sprints. Football shape is getting hit, recovering from getting hit, and getting callous. That's the best way I can put it, Gene. I know it's not accurate, but is that something as well? Or maybe we're seeing more injuries because these guys aren't callous to getting hit anymore.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that there's an easy way to put it necessarily. The way I always like to describe it is, you guys, if you've ever been in a car accident or somebody kind of sneaks up behind you and bumps you a little bit, you're aware of what's happening. Your body is aware of what's happening before you're aware of what's happening, and it has reflexes for that. And those same things are tested when you take football hits, because you're not sure of where the angle of the hit is coming from. You're not sure exactly how hard it's going to be. All of the position sense that your ligaments and joints and everything else send back to your brain to tell your body where all your limbs are in space get tested during live football play in a way that they don't get tested in walkthroughs and cardio and all of those other things. So I do think there's something to football shape versus good cardiovascular shape. It's tougher, though, to say whether or not, and I think Chip Kelly does a good job of this, it's tougher to say just how many reps does a player need to be in football shape but not beat up. And I think hopefully with the advent of these GPS markers that we're seeing, the radio frequency tags that are in helmets and shoulder pads now, mostly shoulder pads, we'll get a sense of exactly when players are doing too much or too little. And Chip Kelly is doing that. A number of teams are doing that. There are a couple of companies out there that are putting these tags in the shoulder pads and monitoring that information. I don't think there's enough data out there yet for a team to say this is what we need to do and this is what we don't need to do, but I think we're getting a little bit closer to having that be the case.
He's the great Dr. Gene Bramall on Gene Bramall, at Gene Bramall on Twitter. He's on top of things. That's a save. Yes. He's on top of everything. Gene, be good. We'll talk to you in a bit.
Good deal. Thanks.
Dr. Gene Bramall, ladies and gentlemen. Sigmund, the look on your face is not kind. And I talked about cheering. How about boom?
I mean, not booing. See, so I don't have any. Booing, I'm not going to lustily boo these flat performances on defense, matador defense. And I know people are going to complain. The typical, I don't want to besmirch my fellow Steelers fans. I should just stop that thought. But there will be people that will bring up these hits that are getting called as personal fouls. But that's, look, you got to make the plays. And the Steelers have just been flat. They had one good drive. And they really haven't sustained that much on offense since then, whereas Joe Flacco and Steve Smith are. Using the tight ends and so on, they're making the plays. And this is just frustrating. The Steelers, the stat that's going around is the Steelers were up 27-3 at the half last week, and they've now been outscored 47-9 since then.
That's bad, right? And the physicality there, of course. Besides, Upshaw got flagged on Ben earlier in the game. So What about these hits? Put a bunch of skirts on him. I love Skirt Guy. He's so fun to play with. Put some skirts on him. Calm down, dude. Okay? Calm the F down. Standout players, anyone here, Bloom, you'd like to highlight? I mean, everyone looking at, do I start Justin Forsett? No.
No, I mean, look, the Ravens' running game is exactly what we thought it was. Bernard Pierce has got 18 carries, and it's been a game script that's been very running back friendly in the sense that they've held the lead for pretty much the whole game. He's got 58 yards. He's got one catch for 7 yards. Perhaps he's going to roll up a few more points. They're not getting a push in short yardage. I don't know if the touchdowns are going to come for Bernard Pierce. I suppose he's worked his way out of the doghouse with that robust 3.2 yards per carry. But remember, the way that the Browns, Weston Crowell were ripping off. Even Ben Tate had a long run against the Steelers last week. 3.2 yards per carry. Not very impressive. Steve Smith's the guy here. And I got to say, hats off to Matt Waldman. Matt, you and I have probably had 3 or 4 conversations over the course of this year leading up to the year where you would say, I'm telling you, Smith's going to, he's going to show people something. And I'd say, yeah, but for fantasy, how much is he really going to show us? And, yeah, for fantasy, for all of it. Smith is the guy, and he and Flacco have something good going.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference between Smith and Carolina a few years ago and Smith now is that he's no longer the one-man gang who was absolutely impossible to stop and one-on-one and throwing the ball downfield. Now he's just an ordinary fantasy wide receiver too, as opposed to a guy that if he had a good quarterback when he was in his prime could have been a top 5 wide receiver on a consistent basis if he stayed healthy. So, I mean, if you say I know there were some that were worried about his speed, but I think he's demonstrated that he has plenty of speed. He's still strong. He just may not have that extra level of explosiveness, or maybe he just doesn't have a quarterback who just doesn't care and throws it up for grabs to him, because that's what he had in Delhomme. Cam Newton wasn't really that way, and we know Flacco really isn't that way either. So it could be worse for Pittsburgh Steelers fans, or it could be worse tonight because you could be that guy or production company, whoever it was, who put the commercial on the Baltimore Ravens game as a ambulance chasing type of Hollywood thing of the movie No Good Deed, which is about a man basically stalking a woman in her own home. So I would say that was really like a really good ambulance chasing kind of a thing that we would have on this broadcast concerning what's gone on this week. Bravo, even though I'm a big fan of Idris Elba and Taraji Henson, really just bad decision there.
Oh, God. The bad decisions continue from the Ravens' official website. I like Ray Rice. And the damn tweets and everything. Oh, God. All right. We could do 2 hours on the discuss there. I do want to bring up our next topic because a lot of fantasy owners really hot and bothered about what's going to happen with the NFLPA and the NFL. Now, Bloom, you've laid out the plan flying blind. We've talked about it on the preview shows. Flying blind. I've talked to Adam Schefter yesterday, and in talking about Josh Gordon specifically, not Welker. Let's save Welker for just a little bit, but let's talk about Josh Gordon right now. And Adam said picking up Josh Gordon is a waste of a pick. He said it in fantasy terms because he said he gets zillions of texts and zillions of tweets from fantasy owners saying, should I pick up Josh Gordon? And Adam Schefter believes, from what he's been told, it's a waste of a pick. It's a waste of a transaction to pick up Josh Gordon. So we are flying blind, Bloom. But what's the recommendation that you give to fantasy owners? And Matt, when Bloom's done, I'd like you to jump in as well because now we've got the Cameron, the shoulder thing, and Tate, not that big of a deal, but still, you've got some injuries. You have a lack of playmakers. It would be nice to get Gordon back, but in the end, is it just a pipe dream?
I have no idea. Look, I cannot comfortably predict anything the NFL is going to do right now. The NFL is on tilt, okay? I also don't know how persuasive and influential Drew Rosenhaus will be over this process to get his client something that you have to basically shoehorn in. It's like at the table, here's the NFLPA, here's the NFL, and here's Drew Rosenhaus representing Josh Gordon. I don't know. The latest we're hearing from many different sources puts it somewhere between 6 and 10 games. Mike Garafolo said 8. I don't know if that's 8 starting from when this is agreed upon, which could be tomorrow. I don't know if it's 8 starting from the beginning of the season. I don't think that we should look for any internal consistency. I do think if you say it is 8 starting from tomorrow, then he misses and he's back for the 10th game of the season. Is that worth, your whole waiver wire wallet? It could be in hindsight. We'll see what happens between now and then. I personally, a separate thing for me about utility of this whole situation is I like being able to play the waiver wire. For me, it's part of the fantasy that keeps me engaged week to week. I like the challenge of it. I like making the predictions and seeing how it goes based on how I spend my bucks. So to get Josh Gordon, and I think let's step back and say in most leagues you probably needed to spend 95% plus, in some leagues 100% of your budget. In some leagues, you might have gotten away with 50% or 40%. But at this point, I think that I can't comfortably predict this. There's so many variables. There's so many things. And the other thing that is really, I think, skewing this is most of, and I'm not going to name names or outlets, but let's just say that agents are much more effective in some of these cases at getting their take and their framing of the issue out there. And we saw this when the appeal was going on. So many people were latching onto these narratives that Josh Gordon was going to win his appeal or have his suspension reduced. And now back then, when the NFL seemed predictable, I felt pretty certain that that wasn't going to happen. I didn't see any reason the NFL would do that unilaterally. I didn't see any reason that an arbitrator would say, well, you violated the rules that your union agreed to, but it ain't fair. So you know what? 8 games. So, I mean, I felt like I went through all the washing machine with Josh Gordon stuff with that, and we were done. I have Josh Gordon fatigue. Josh Gordon has Josh Gordon fatigue.
Just let him sell cars, Matt Waldman.
Let me pause this Steelers game and talk about this here, because I think that when you look at the whole issue that Bloom's talking about on tilt here with the NFL, it could be conceivable that the NFL, while the FBI is investigating its offices, that somebody forgets to take the white out on the form that they're going to mail to the Browns and Josh Gordon and his agent, and say that they're going to suspend him for 10 games and actually have whited out the 0. And actually says 1, and then they have to live with it, and then they might have to have a second investigation maybe to actually deal with that. But let's talk really about, what's going on here with Gordon. I can totally see Drew Rosenhaus shoehorning this in. I mean, how could you not see an agent shoehorning something in? They're shameless when it comes to this kind of stuff. They're going to work their client every way they possibly can, and I don't think that they really have any remorse about any of this. They're very aggressive, and for good reason, for what they try to do. So looking at the value of Josh Gordon, look, I spent $500 in our staff league to get Gordon yesterday, and the reason I did it is this. And Adam Harstead at Football Guys did a really good job of actually analyzing this on an internal staff email, because I believe he bid 90, and we had somebody else bid 100 as well. I just happened to get him. I mentioned in our email, I had 40 transactions in our staff league last year, and 3 of them actually had any utility, and only 1 of those actually came before December, when people actually had money to spend. And the best transaction I made was a trade, and I lost the championship by 9 points. So the way I look at it is, if I'm only going to have less than 10% of my waiver wire transactions be any good, why not go for the big guns and hope for the best with Gordon? Especially when you look at what Harstead did, and he looked at some of the past staff leagues and looked at some of those and saw that there really wasn't anybody that had of great utility that you spent a lot of money on. So why not pick a player that if he's going to get on the field is going to make a huge difference? So to me, do I lose out on the waiver wire each week? Yeah, except there's first come first serve in our free agency league. So maybe I'm picking over guys who might help me out 1 week to the next. But in our leagues, there's a great deal of parity. So what that means for me is that I can get away with starting one guy that maybe in most leagues goes hot, because we see this all the time in our staff leagues. There's readers that will look at our leagues and go, how the heck are you guys starting this guy or starting this guy, or how's this guy actually making starting lineups? Because that's just the nature of the competitiveness of our league and the way it's set up, that you oftentimes are starting guys that nobody else in any other conventional league would probably be thinking about, and you actually benefit from it. So, while it is a risk, and that the worst case scenario is I blew $500, he doesn't play at all, and I'm out on the waiver wire, so what? It's just a game. The way I look at it too is that I have a good enough players that I can work a way to either work a trade if I need to, or I can use first come first serve. And if I'm only relying on 1 or 2 to make a big difference in the league, then it means I have to be more aggressive in other ways to go. So, and if I lose out and go 0-13, which I can actually be 1-12 at this point. So if if that happens, so what? At least I knew that I played to win, and I think that's what you ultimately have to look at. Is is that your attitude and how you want to look at it and say this guy could put me over the top, or are you like, I look at my team and I look at the situation, I don't think it can happen, and it's not worth the risk. I'd rather kind of take the smaller plays and hope they blow up on the level of Josh Gordon, and maybe have 2 or 3 that if I add them together, they can equal that for me over time.
We've seen this before with certain suspended players that come back, halfway through the season or whatever. It seems like there's guys that try to push it too hard. I'm trying to think if that happened to David Boston. I know that it happened with Von Miller last year, but guys that try to push themselves too much and end up getting hurt because they're trying to make up for those 8 games that they lost. Just get back out there. Now, Wes Welker, if we cannot predict what the NFL is going to do, Bloom, but I believe Welker could come back like that.
Right.
Because we're talking about a first-time offender compared to Gordon. Because it's not just this test that was it was barely hot. What about the other 4? Okay? What about the Dewey, which I know they're still going through litigation process, what have you. But I believe Wes Welker can come back like that. Now, if you look at transactions from across the NFL, the Broncos have made moves on the 53-man roster, getting rid of Nathan Palmer, putting him back on the PS. So they've got a spot. They've got a 52-man roster right now. Now, the Browns did the same thing. They signed one and they cut one tonight, actually, signing a guy, Ryan Seymour, to the practice squad and terminated the contract of offensive guard James Brown. So they are themselves also messing with a 52-man roster as you're making room. Whereas Gordon, I don't think he'll be back. Welker, I could see being back. Now, for the people that I'm getting questions about, is he going to play this week? If we go by what the Broncos have told us, that Kayvon and Ronnie were not ready with the game plan, Welker's not going to play this week. Never say never, but let's just go on what the team did last week with a couple of guys that missed 2 days of practice. Welker's missed more than that. When Welker comes back, they are taking a less is more approach. Per Mike Kliss, our Broncos insider, a less is more approach with Wes Welker. And it's still... Emmanuel Sanders goes out there, I don't know, preseason, whatever, but then he goes out week 1, does his thing, mad that he had a dive for that near touchdown catch. And there's still fantasy owners like, yeah, but when Welker comes back, Sanders, no, not really. Bloom, your thoughts?
Well, I was never that excited about Welker this year, before the concussion, before any of this, because he was looking like a player in decline. I do want to go back to one thing you said about why Welker and Gordon are different. I think that the key here is that Welker's suspension happened in the 2014 league year. So to have something in this new drug policy agreement to say all suspensions, all rulings from this league year are now retroactively reevaluated and redisposed of under the new policy, that's a cut and dry change to a policy. There's a clear point in time. This affects Orlando Scandrick, and there's one other player I'm spacing right now that it affects. So then you have Josh Gordon. Well, he failed his drug test in December. This is why it has to be a Drew Rosenhaus thing where you're negotiating specifically on people are like, what about Justin Blackmon? What about? No, this is Drew Rosenhaus, the puppet master. So that's why Welker, it has nothing to do with the severity of Welker's offense or the number of times he's had the offense. It just has to do with this is a very clean black line they can draw. As far as what Welker will do this week, I don't know. And then next week, it's Seattle. So I'm not going to be that excited about playing Welker next week either. So I do think that if you have Welker, you were maybe thinking, the 5th game you were going to get something out of him, maybe the 4th game.
Matt, your thoughts on Little Wes?
I think looking at this situation, I mean, it's just one of those deals where he's certainly worth rostering. He's certainly worth a guy that if you have a chance that you maybe want to be able to acquire him on the cheap, that wouldn't be a bad thing to do, just because in case of injury, you still have the Peyton Manning factor. You still have the fact that he is going to contribute in the red zone. I would think that he would still be a red zone specialist in this particular offense, even if he's not going to see as much time as some other players, and that makes him a good play. I mean, we talk all the time about running backs and say, people are going hog wild about Isaiah Crowell because he got 2 touchdowns last week and that he's going to be a red zone play in this offense for the next 4 weeks. Well, I can't think of a better red zone specialist from the slot and who's more precise and in sync with his quarterback than Peyton Manning and Wes Welker. So to me, there's always a puncher's chance with using him. He may not be, the top 12, top 15 receiver that we're looking at down the line here. But if you got a team that's kind of fed up with him and you can get him on the cheap and you need a wide receiver right now, why not?
And I believe from what I've asked Adam Gase is that there may be change in the route design. Now, Gase said there, all routes open, all possibilities open for Welker. But if you really think about it, do you want to run a jerk route to the inside? Now, Welker runs option routes, but will he start making more breaks to the outside where there's less action, where there's not the safety coming in? That's something to consider as well. Bloom, we need an update because I just saw Justin Forsett rip off a big 41-yard run, and we've got a different score as our beloved Steelers get hammered.
Yeah, now the Steelers are in give-up mode, giving up good runs to Pierce and to Forsett, and Pierce is up to 20 for 76 now. He was he was stoned at the goal line. Flacco was stoned at the goal line too. They had to settle for another field goal. Justin Tucker, hook 'em horns. 4 field goals for him tonight. So the Steelers it's so funny, Cease. You get the feeling, and Steelers fans, I mean, I'm the opposite of a homer who sees everything with rose-colored glasses, so we can put that out there right now. But you get the feeling the Steelers season might have peaked at halftime last week.
Oh, man, that's a deep
Don't you guys
dagger.
realize that the
That's a
AFC
dagger.
North is just full with slow starters anyway? I mean, this has always been the case.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even carried over to some of the AFC South that migrated from the AFC North. They're just historically slow starters, either slow halves, or slow halves of the season, so.
All right, Browns fan. You don't need to, comfort us with the
But
comforting us.
I could call y'all the satin curtain.
I appreciate that, Matt. Yeah, the sad curtain. We're not the
Or
sad.
the
We're just kind
satin.
of bummed.
Yeah.
We're the bummed curtain. We're Linus's security blanket. Look, the thing is, and I hear you about the Steelers starting slow, and people are going to bring up that they started 0-4 last year, and still almost made the playoffs and things like that. But usually the Steelers game at Baltimore is a pretty emotional, intense game for this team. The Thanksgiving game last year that everyone will remember with Tomlin, they lost 22-20. It was a terrific tight game with Charlie Batch. It was the game that I thought the Steelers had punched their way off the ropes and were really going to make a run at the playoffs in 2012. They go on to lose 3 of their last 4 after that one, but they won 23-20. This is more like 2011 whenever they came out and got beat 35-7. And the team had a nice run after that and made the playoffs, and we all know what happened there. So I guess that's the hope. But I think that the names changed on the back of the jerseys. They claim speed on defense, Ryan Shazier. Right? Look who's out of position on plays, Ryan Shazier. I just think that this team doesn't know how to change a paradigm. There's a really good article today. I'm going to make a point out of all this rambling. There was a really good article today by Lance Zierlein about how the NFL is changing at a breakneck speed, and people may not be realizing it. I think the Steelers might be one of the organizations that's not realizing it.
Stuck in the old school. That is a definite concern. This is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. We're live here on YouTube, our YouTube channel, Football Guys TV. That's youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. That's .com for the cool kids. And this episode will also be on the Audible, on iTunes. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks for downloading, subscribing, commenting, etc. We love you guys. We love talking about football. We dig the fact that so many of you enjoy it. I've got to remind you about our sponsor, FanDuel, FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. How'd you do last week? Did you lose to Clayton Gray and Fessel Alpha because he had Calvin Johnson and Joik Bell? You can rebound, baby. You can do it every single week. Set your lineup. Pick the lineup that you want at FanDuel.com. Work within the salary cap structure. It's so much fun. FanDuel.com, the leader in one-week fantasy football leagues, paying over $10 million each week. Real cash money, baby, and immediate payouts. You love it right there, FanDuel.com. I want you to go to the website right now, FanDuel.com. Sign up where every week is a new season. That's FanDuel.com. Sign up today. Concerns is the next topic, next order of business. And Bloom, I'll start with you. Matt, I want you to jump in after that. We are in contact with multiple beat writers and insiders with teams around the National Football League. And we know that a lot of the old school, speaking of old school, the old school newspapery guys, are a bit less excitable as others, maybe. And you love that. You love the old school guys. I talked about Mike Kliss earlier. The reason I bring this up, Bloom, is I talked to Adam Teicher today from ESPN.com, and Normally, Adam is a straight shooter. He always has been. And he's never one to get overly excited, but he's also never one to be overly pessimistic. And it seemed like he was when talking about the concerns with this offense. Now, he didn't bring up Travis Kelce. I didn't get back to him on Travis Kelce. But when talking about Jamal Charles specifically, and specifically with Jamal Charles, Adam Teicher told me there could be some concerns there with this offense. Now, it's not just the 11 touches. He believes that Jamal Charles could get double the touches this week in week 2. 11 touches against Tennessee was a terrible decision. Andy Reid took the blame for it when asked about that. But are you concerned? Because what do we do on the recap show when a major guy has a bad, Adrian Peterson, a bad game for them, or Jamal Charles? What do we always say? Calm the F down. You've got Jamal Charles. When Adam Teicher is telling me there's concerns with this offense, concerns with Alex Smith, concerns with the weapons, Donnie Avery's not the answer. Getting a half-hearted Dwayne Bowe back, not the answer. Fasano's nothing. Maybe Kelce something. But how concerned are you with teams that say, okay, single it up on the outside? What, is Junior Hemingway going to beat you? I mean, you single it up on the outside. It's football 101. You put 8 guys in the box, and you do whatever you can to shut down Jamal Charles. How concerned are you? Because fantasy owners shouldn't be, invested heavily in Dwayne Bowe. If you got Kelce, you got him late as your second tight end, likely. How concerned are you, Bloom, when you hear what Teicher had to say about Jamal Charles specifically, and being concerned about how this offense can get things going this year?
I was concerned before hearing any of the stuff that Teicher said. I actually went on a Twitter rant today about it, or more like a Twitter sad sigh session about it, because I meditated on Jamal Charles, and I particularly meditated on that matchup coming up against Denver, and I'm worried. I'm worried about Jamal Charles this year, and I wrote in my buy low sell high column today that I would have traded him probably for Le'Veon Bell straight up. I would have tried to get a little bit more than Le'Veon Bell. I think that train has left the station as Le'Veon Bell. And by the way, Haloti Ngata interception. Yeah, you heard me right. Haloti Ngata interception. But Le'Veon Bell had over 100 yards tonight on 16 touches in a game when his team basically got blown out. That's a stud fantasy running back, not 34 yards or whatever it was on 11 touches. And some of that's Andy Reid, and some of that's Andy Reid saying, hey, I need to use him more. But know that in this game last week, Jamal Charles had less than half of the total yards in his lowest total yards game all year last year. And this is what I'm getting at, is this is looking like 2012. Look, Jamal Charles is a magnificent player. You are not going to hold him down every game. You're not going to hold him down all year. He's going to have big plays and big games. I promise you that. He did in 2012. Remember, he had like 1,500 yards rushing, I think, in 2012. But he was a nightmare to own in fantasy football because he fluctuated between 6 or 8 points, and this is in PPR leagues, and 30 points. That's not a running back 1. That's a boom-bust running back 2, which is not what you wanted in your top 4 pick. Now, Andy Reid will use him more as in the passing game than he was used with Todd Haley. However, what we saw last week was Tennessee, and this is what we're talking about, Cease. This is what you were outlining. You take away the comfort zone, okay? Take away the screen game. Tennessee was taking that away. There's no counterpunch. You have to have a counterpunch. Dwayne Bowe's not the counterpunch. Maybe Travis Kelce is the counterpunch. And if we're telling a story about how, well, week 1, remember we were all freaked out about Jamal Charles and now it ended up okay, it'll probably be because Travis Kelce arrives way ahead of schedule and is that guy ripping the seams and otherwise giving defenses something to account for. But that's counting on Alex Smith. And the funny thing is, I'm seeing a lot of people say, it's offensive line. I told you, offensive line. No, offensive line doesn't really have that much to do with it. I think it's that the Chiefs are just not – the Chiefs are on dumpster fire watch. Derek Johnson was a massive, massive loss for this defense. They're going into Denver this week, and they're probably going to get thumped. Then you have coming up games at Miami, at San Francisco, at San Diego, New England coming to KC. This team is looking at 0-6. I'm afraid this could be a repeat of 2012. And now Bernard Pierce is still ripping off. Bernard Pierce is ripping off long runs against the Steelers. He's going to end up at 22 for 96, but I still think he's not anything special. In a blowout win, and it took 2 salting it away carries. So I'm in this foul mood.
Well, let's change that, Bloom. Let's change it, baby. By the way, don't be right for the wrong reasons. Bernard Pierce. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you rock on with your bad self with Bernard Pierce. Matt, I'm going to throw this stat at you with KC. 9 games, start out last year, 9-0. In the 9 games since then, they're 2-7.
That's because teams take a look at Alex Smith and say, go ahead and throw the ball deep. Please throw the ball deep. Please try to throw the ball deep. Because we know you may get it for distance, but you're just going to hang it up there and let us go and pick it up like, candy from a baby, But basically, here's the deal. Let's take off from where Bloom said Charles may be nothing more than a boom bust running back 2. If that's the case, then what do you do? And I would say that in this case, what you have to consider is this: what does your team look like? Do you need something at wide receiver? Do you have a decent running back 2? Do you have a steady guy at running back 2, and then maybe a steady flex guy that you feel pretty decent about? Then yes, maybe you try to trade Charles for another running back like Le'Veon Bell, which I honestly think no one in their right mind is going to do unless you happen to be in a local league with some folks who may not be as hip to what goes on with what we see with football guys, subscribers who are competing in leagues with each other. If that's the case, then yeah, you might be able to get Le'Veon Bell. But if you can't, you still might be able to get a decent wide receiver 1. You can probably load up your lineup in other places, maybe get a couple of good players who are starters, and be able to soften the blow of not having that high-end running back 1. And that's fine. But if you don't have that, then maybe it is a good idea to hold on to him right now. And the reason that I'll give you some hope to consider here to counter Bloom in this narrative would be that at some point, because the Chiefs weren't going to be able to stop anybody because they've lost Derek Johnson, because their offensive line isn't going to be able to hold up on third down situations the way they should, because Alex Smith isn't going to be able to operate in situations where he's going to need to be aggressive and take advantage of it on a level where that they can get ahead early. They're going to be playing from behind enough that teams are going to soften up by the mid-third quarter and go, sure, you want Jamal Charles to run it, go ahead. Throw the screen pass to him, go ahead. He can run all day for all we care because we're up by 21 right now. So they'll loosen up enough that maybe what Jamal Charles turns out to be is kind of more of a steady garbage man for you, as opposed to being the that front running guy that's going to get a ton of carries and meaningful carries for the football team, but still get enough carries and looks that when they're coming back, that there may be hope that they're going to come back into this game, and then with 5 minutes left after he's got 80 or 90 yards and a touchdown or combined 120 yards rushing, receiving, that with 5 minutes left and they're like, yeah, we couldn't get it done and we'll shut it down now, put Niall Davis in the game, and he still comes across as a pretty solid player. So again, you try to trade him if you can. I can understand that logic, but at the same time, look at your lineup and understand that if it's good for you to just roll with a boom bust running back 2 at this stage because you can't get a guy like Le'Veon Bell, fine. But also look at other options, maybe diversifying your portfolio a little bit and being able to get a solid wide receiver 1 and maybe a strong tight end 1 or something like that, and being able to do a little bit different if you can't get that straight up running back for running back.
We need a new Matt Waldman show, really mad money, here on the Audible. Bloom, I'll pass this back to you, Matt. Chime in super quick on this one, and we'll move on from Jamal Charles. In talking about reshaping your game, I was going to bring up Le'Veon Bell next. I still will. But I always remember Thomas Jones. That is the one player, whoever I think reshaped your game, that's the guy I think of. Now, Jamal Charles had to reshape his game. When he came out of Tejas, he was always taking it to the corner store. And look at his rookie film. Every single carry, I'm bouncing outside, use that speed. No, he had to learn how to become an inside-out runner and be better at creating his own space with his speed, which is amazing and electric. Thomas Jones reshaped his game, save you the big story, but bust first-round pick, top 12, I believe, with Arizona, goes to Tampa Bay for half a year, career near-death experience, kind of gets it, figures it out. Then we know Chicago, the Jets, and with the Chiefs there as well. And that's where I come back in here, Bloom, and ask you, we talk about high-value targets, okay? Rob Gronkowski may be on a target count or a play count, but it's going to be high-value targets. Is there a way that the Chiefs could perhaps use a bit more of an Al Davis? Because remember when Thomas Jones and Jamal Charles were there. Is there a way that they could give high-value carries to Jamal Charles, that passing situation where it's a draw play, or, you use it more effectively in space when it's first down, obvious running, your own 20, maybe they could use Davis there. Would that maybe help jumpstart him where he's more consistent because he's not taking those hits inside and he's not getting worn down on those low-value carries? Is that an option here with a Al Davis, Bloom?
No, it makes the offense predictable. It telegraphs the offense depending on which back is on the field. So I just think that look, and then people are saying, oh, if you're worried about Charles, does that mean go get Niall Davis? No, if Charles can't produce in this offense, what's Niall Davis gonna do? I honestly think that almost holding Niall Davis as a handcuff to Charles, you'd better off carrying any number of other running backs with upside when they actually get on the field. If Charles goes down, that's the only real move this offense has. So, can you tell how bleak I feel about this team? The problem is that you go out in your home opener and you look as flat and off as the Chiefs did. You have to ask yourself some questions about this team. And, I don't want to be this simplistic about it, but you have Alex Smith now has his extension, What's the motivation? Where's the edge? Where's the sense of urgency?
Held him hostage, man. That quarterback situation. You didn't have to pay Alex Smith. That's a point Teicher said today. You didn't have to. You could have let him play it out.
It didn't change the out. It would not have changed the outlook of their season whatsoever to not pay him.
Yep. Oh boy, Matt. Anyway, I talk about high-value carries. Anything you spark you there?
I kind of agree with Bloom in that case, and I think that really what I think about when we talk about this offense is, besides the fact that I would like to see Alex Smith get lost at a Big Bang Theory convention and never come back, I think that maybe what we could do is actually one of the things that I did see work with this offense is when they did use two tight end sets and they didn't spread the field out as much with multiple receivers, if you call those guys starting receivers right now in the NFL. And I think that was part of the problem, is that Smith was so bent on trying to find Donnie Avery, so bent on trying to get downfield and throw the ball, where he actually did have an open man in the middle of the field. And if you can use more two tight end sets, they were able to run effectively from those two tight end sets when they did run the ball in those situations. And I think that they can do a little bit more with Kelsey and Fasano to mix and match good kind of mismatches with the defense if they focus on that a little bit more, because as we've heard about from analysts and different teams, it's difficult for defensive coordinators and defenses in general to match up well against two tight end sets, because there is a real balance there and there's a lot that you can do with that personnel. And I would like to see them work more with that, because the strength of this team really is the tight end position. Fasano isn't anything great. He's kind of I would say he's a poor man's Heath Miller. That's probably what you got with him. He's a smart guy, not quite as athletic as Miller, but reliable enough. And then you have Kelsey, who is, honestly, probably one of the most athletic tight ends in the game right now that you haven't heard of. And so if they can do a little bit more there, that could help Charles out. It could spark this offense, but we have to see how flexible Andy Reid is going to be.
That's an image I'll never get out of my head. And talking about the Steelers tonight, Bloom, as we switch topics from Kansas City to Pittsburgh there, it seemed like we were going to get more Heath Miller, which is what, when you hear about, Justin Brown saying it's going to be Roethlisberger, the no-huddle's here to stay, and you think about one of his favorite guys, of course, Antonio Brown and Heath Miller, and then you've got Marcus Wheaton as an ascending talent there. The fumbles, obviously Brown and Heath Miller both putting the ball on the turf and losing those fumbles. Was it curious to you that after at the beginning of this game, I thought I saw a couple of plays, a couple of targets, and he had 7 targets overall, so it's not like he didn't try. But is it curious to you now in 2 weeks, we haven't seen enough Heath Miller, in my opinion?
Well, I think Heath Miller has a very specific role in this offense now, and I think the emergence of Marcus Wheaton and Le'Veon Bell has reduced his role and drew a pretty solid line around it. Where I see Heath Miller doing well, obviously in the middle of the field, but particularly when they're in their no-huddle sets, and Roethlisberger gets those plays where he just catches and throws it right away. You know, I think it's a good rhythm thing for the no-huddle offense to force the defense to react that quickly sometimes, and it's always Heath Miller. You know, when he just catches the ball and throws it right away, it's always Heath Miller, like 5, 6, 7 yards downfield, the middle of the field, often in stride. Heath Miller can do that. But I think you have a lot of trust there with Marcus Wheaton after last week. Maybe not quite as much this week. You know, the connections. Well, it was Roethlisberger, really. The connections weren't as strong. And then Le'Veon Bell, who looks just tremendous in the passing game. And also, we saw him last week line up, split out wide sometimes, catching the ball, lining up as a wide receiver. So when you have these guys, and you know, I mean, do I really need to even say that Bell and Wheaton are more dynamic with the ball in their hands than Heath Miller? No disrespect to Heath Miller, but that's where we're at with Heath Miller. So I think we have to revise expectations for Heath Miller because Le'Veon Bell and Marcus Wheaton are here, and you know, I would be throwing to them before I'd be throwing to Heath Miller too.
Yeah, and Le'Veon Bell, and of course regular fans, longtime fans. I know we have a lot of new listeners, and I know one of our iTunes comments was like, "Cecil never admits when he's wrong." Yeah, I do. Le'Veon Bell coming out of Michigan State as a space runner. And Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but he did line up outside, sometimes in the slot as well at Michigan State, because we know he's a fantastic receiver out of the backfield. For me, the changes that he's made, and it's much more than just the physique. He lost a bunch of weight. No. It's the mindset of running in the pro game. I talked about Charles earlier. The mindset of a college back is out-athlete your competition. And it doesn't matter if it's Big Ten, you can out-athlete them because they're all slow. It doesn't matter if it's Texas or Michigan State or USC or whatever. It's all college football. You can, even in the major programs, against other major programs, you can still out-athlete some of those guys. And you can get away with being sloppy. Mechanically and mentally sloppy, I believe, is the way that a lot of college running backs come out because they can get away with so much. There are no angles to outrun, you know what I mean? And the discipline. I talked about it with Johnny Manziel. He doesn't have to get used to the speed of the NFL. He played in the SEC. He's got to get used to the discipline of the NFL. And that's really what these young backs have to get to. So Le'Veon Bell for me in college, and Matt, you were the one. Me and Bloom were like, and you were like, it's okay. It's okay. He's become something that on film I didn't see from Le'Veon Bell as more of a space runner, as a guy who needed that large hole. Once he had the hole, he was very swift through it. He had the moves. He's got moves at speed that he can make cuts, not lose much speed. He could always jump over guys. He's been doing that at Michigan State, now in the pros forever. What's been best for Le'Veon Bell for me, Matt, is seeing the mindset of I'm going to be inside out. I'm going to press a hole and then look for that break, look for that daylight, look for that cutback. But initially you have to press the hole. You can't abandon the blocks. You can't abandon the play and be like, screw these guys, I'm going to the corner store. And for me, seeing that growth from Bell, and quick growth, but with the great ones, we saw Jamal Charles turn around in a year. Le'Veon Bell's showed last year what he could do. Matt, and your thoughts on LeGarrette Blount. So on Bell here and Blount, a lot of fantasy owners picking up Blount. Oh, my God, here we go. I'm going to jock block the Bell owner. You got squat if you got LeGarrette Blount. You're hoping that he maybe gets a goal line touchdown. Mute button. Look at him. Look at him.
Oops. So, I think looking at Bell, you could also draw the parallel to Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson also did not know how to press and cut back on a consistent basis, and it was something that Eric Bieniemy worked with him on during his first season with the Vikings. So oftentimes, for me, when I look at Charles and Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, C.J. Spiller, as well as Le'Veon Bell, you would see evidence of them being able to do some of that work. Maybe not as on a consistent of a basis as you would like, but it was there. And when you're looking for, to me, there were obviously question marks about whether he could get away with the quick, short area quicks that he showed at Michigan State, whether that would happen in the NFL. And I think for me, the reason why I was sold on it is really the combine. After looking at his combine information and seeing some of the agility drills that he did and the times for his 230-pound size at that point, it was some of the best agility times that I've seen for a back over the past 10 years. And at that weight, you're like, yeah, if he can do it at that weight, then that short area quickness is what's important. It's just a matter of whether or not he is going to learn to be disciplined enough on a consistent basis. And I felt like he had that in him based on what I saw. It just may not have been completely consistent yet. And we saw that last year. It was there. We saw him, occasionally you're going to make some mistakes because you do think you can out-athlete people. You've been doing it for 4 years, maybe 8 years actually when you count high school. So it's going to be an adjustment. It's just like any other new job. So he's, this year what was just insane to me is that you see him lose 20 pounds, and now he's even quicker, and he's now more confident even in his patience, because he was a patient runner when he showed patience and flashed patience as a runner, not consistently. But now it's like, I know that I can sit back there and make that. I think it was Bloom who was telling me that he heard an interview with some of the linemen basically saying in Pittsburgh last year that they were like, he'd get the ball and we'd be like, when's he going to hit the hole? Like, we know he's supposed to be here by now, but he's not, because he had that confidence to kind of wait and see, and he was able to do it last year, but now he's even sharper with it, and he's even quicker, and he still has the power. I mean, I always compared him to Eddie George in terms of style. Now I look at him, and I think because he's as light as he is, I think the real comparison to make, it's going to seem odd because I'm talking about a former 230-pound back, but a more powerful Reggie Bush. I actually think that if you think about his receiving skills, his agility and quickness, and now that added layer of speed, he's Reggie Bush with some thump, and I mean that's a pretty awesome thing.
That is awesome. Tremendously awesome. Bloom, thoughts on fantasy owners who, maybe shallow bench and they've still got Blount there? Well, we've seen 2 weeks from Blount.
No, I mean, he's not going to look anything like Bell does in this offense. He got a touchdown last week, but no. I think without Le'Veon Bell, we talked about this with some other offenses, like it isn't quite as pronounced as Charles and KC or Foster and Houston. But I think Bell's one of the things that makes this offense. He was the only thing really making this offense go tonight. So I think that, again, it's funny because I think one of the things we're going to have to break ourselves of in the fantasy world when I see analysis like this, it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. When when Ellington was going to be out, it's like, well, maybe that's good for Carson Palmer because no, it's not good. When teams lose important weapons of their offense, it's not good. We don't just take this production and move it somewhere else. The whole pie gets smaller. So the whole pie of the Steelers' offense gets way smaller with Le'Veon Bell out. Obviously, Blount doesn't fit in the no-huddle, which is the only time they seem to move the ball these days. So Blount's a drop at this point. I would rather carry Dion Lewis right now than Blount.
He's Sigmund Bloom, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like when you're in a bad mood, Bloom. Let's cheer you up with a new game.
It's funny because I say that I'm not a Steelers fan, and then look at me. I mean, I am a Steelers fan. I'm born and bred. I was born into it. But I'm just saying, we won some Super Bowls, but I'm not chasing anybody around with a butcher knife like my cousin did. Steelers fan, Western Pennsylvania. Steelers arguments. Steelers arguments. And I have enough cousins that's not going to be any at all incriminating. And he chased around another one of my cousins. Yeah, right. No, really. And I guarantee you, every Western Pennsylvania born and bred Steelers fan has another story has a story about some sort of near violence or near major incident about an argument about a Steelers game. I guarantee it.
And here's the thing for me, and I talked about this today on my show, like teams you hate. Who do you hate? For me, it's Baltimore. I had people texting, well, you're a freaking bandwagon jumper. Yeah, when I was 5, and they were winning 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. So if you want to call a 5-year-old Cecil Lammey a bandwagon jumper, yes, I jumped onto the Steelers bandwagon. Been there ever since, even through the Mark Malone days. I almost dropped a GD bomb. Sorry, Joe. And it's the Ravens. I don't care if Pittsburgh. Let's turn it into a Steelers show, Bloom. I don't care if they're 2-14 as long as those 2 are Baltimore. I effing hate Baltimore. I hate losing to Baltimore. And I rarely grasp onto the fan part of me anymore, just because in covering the NFL, you can't really be a fan. But in the Steelers Ravens games, I allow myself to feel those feelings, and it doesn't feel good when Baltimore wins. So Baltimore, hats off to you. We'll move on from that. Let's play a game. Remember, I was going to up the mood. Now I'm bringing it down. Let's play a game before we get to Dr. Gene and the questions here in just a little bit. But I want to go through quickly, stamp it or trash it, because you have your stamp of approval on some of these players that are coming out, or you just trash it. It's week 1. No, this guy's a bunch of nothing. Stamp it or trash it. Bloom, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to start with quarterback Jake Locker. Briefly, are you stamping him, approved, or are you trashing him? We'll move on.
Gold star for this week. And he looks good. He looks calm, patient, accurate. He looks like what Ken Wisenhunt's asking him to do are things that he can do, including throwing those balls above the rim for Justin Hunter, who should have a massive breakout this week against Dallas's electric football defense. So yeah, I think that Jake Locker could be one of those guys that we say at quarterback, and JJ Zacharyson, ZZ Zacharyson, where are you, Mr. Late round quarterback? Because Jake Locker looks like another example of with the exception of say Peyton Manning, and we'll see about Breeze and Rodgers, but if you keep starting him, you're going to have a matchup against the Colts coming up in 2 weeks, matchup against the Jags 2 weeks after that, Washington. I think that you can at least have half of your starts this year come from Locker if he doesn't get hurt, knock on wood, and it looks like it's going to be lucrative.
Stamp it or trash it, Matt Waldman. Chris Ivory. Stamp it, approved, or trash it?
I'm going to...
That's a tough one, isn't it?
It is a tough one. I will say this. I'm going to stamp it because when I look at I just think his talent's too good, and I think that talent wins out. And as a result of that, while I have misgivings about the Rex Ryan regime as a whole, the one thing that Ivory does and is used to is not getting consistent carries and still being able to run the ball well. And so I think that he's somewhat Rex Ryan virus resistant. And as a result of that, I'm going to have to stamp it.
Virus resistant. The strain cannot get to him. Stamp it or trash it, Bloom. Back to you. And this time, and I said this in the preview or recap show, I can't remember which. And there are certain players. I remember when we brought up John Brown, it's like we need to be talking more about John Brown. We need to be talking more about Allen Hurns, to the consistent drumbeat that you've had from undrafted rookie all the way up till now. So Allen Hurns, wide receiver Jacksonville, stamp it or trash it?
I'll stamp it. I mean, what? Bet against trends like this at your own risk, okay? Because it was happening in the preseason. And look, again, in the preseason, you saw people say, okay, which of the rookie receivers, Marquise Lee or Allen Robinson, is going to get hurt by Hurns? It just became that clear that early on to the Jags Twitter out there. And Jags Twitter is one of the best team Twitters out there. I have this theory that when teams are bad, it means that the fans of the team just become bigger fans of the whole NFL and study the NFL more, and it makes a really knowledgeable fan base. And they were really excited about Hurns, and that alone was enough to get intoxicated from. And then for him to go out and look, what you see from Hurns last week in his first game is a long-limbed, surprising long strider speed. And there was one play, I think it was against Kerry Williams, and look, Kerry Williams is no hallmark gold standard of cornerbacks, but it was a post, and Hearns just gave that little nudge to the outside with his shoulder and then snapped it back inside, and Kerry Williams was standing still. It was easy. It was an easy touchdown. When you're an undrafted rookie free agent and you're scoring easy touchdowns, I know it was Kerry Williams, but this is not a fluke. These were not flukish plays that led to his scores. These were plays where he was making plays, and he's making plays by getting open deep. And the one thing I'll say this for Chad Henne, because the Jaguars seem like they believe they can win with Chad Henne. But Chad Henne will take shots downfield. He will keep taking shots downfield. And that's good for Hearns. And then when we switch over to Blake Bortles, I think that this whole offense could really come alive. So yeah, go ahead.
Can I add something about this? I think what's really the most fascinating thing about Hearns is the fact that you saw it at Miami. He could make plays in tight physical coverage. This is the thing that if they made a doll out of me and pulled a string, I would probably have this phrase that would come out of my mouth out of one of the 10, is that can the wide receiver play in tight physical coverage and take the hit? And that's something that Hearns showed, and something that Marquise Lee did not show consistently. I don't care what year you say. I don't like the junior year, senior year, whatever year excuse that I hear fans make about Marquise Lee. There's no excuse for the fact that throughout his career, he could not make the play in tight physical coverage on a consistent basis, and less consistent than even Brandon Cooks, who had some issues with it but could still show that he could come down with it in some of the tougher situations. So when you look at this is the difference between a guy who many thought might be a first-round pick and a guy that no one ever heard of in some regards, unless you're watching a lot of film. And it should tell you that there's not much of a difference in the draft between a first-round pick and an undrafted free agent at a position in this league, and that really what it comes down to sometimes is certain skills like these, because you can learn how to run routes, you can learn, you can get better at blocking, you can get better at conditioned, you can become a better athlete and go up, get up to that next level and become better conditioned, but when it comes down to certain skills, you need to have it, and if you don't, it doesn't matter what your draft status is. And this is why when people say, well, the draft should be some indicator of accuracy of scouting talent, that they are completely off base, because there's such a small difference between that. It's really an accurate assessment of who gets opportunities on the field. That might be a slightly more accurate assessment for the draft, not whether they're talented.
Now, I do believe we may have a prize giveaway on this. I just put it out on Twitter. What would Matt Waldman talking doll say? What would a Matt Waldman talking doll say? Bloom, I believe, I don't have my backpack with me, and yes, I do carry around this picture from Five-ish of the Love Enforcer with all of us on it. I think we should give away an autographed copy to whoever has the best saying for Matt Waldman's talking doll. Dr. Gene, are you down with this? We're just making stuff up. Let's do a contest. I want to know the best saying that would be on Matt Waldman's talking doll. Pull the string, Dr. Gene. Do you like this idea?
I love this idea. I love it.
Hashtag Waldman talking doll. So I want to hear. We'll give you guys a couple of days, and then we will convene and we'll pick a winner. The Love Enforcer picture, I don't know if you can pull it up, Matt, because you're always good at screen share. So instead of doing my last stamp it or trash it, which you probably would have trashed, Matt, since we stamped everything so far, it was Larry Donnell. But I think Waldman talking doll, hashtag Waldman talking doll, I want to know from the people, Bloom, because now my interest, all I want to know is if we only had 10 sayings, it would be like Aunt Beasley. I love you. And come give your Aunt Beasley a hug. What would the Matt Waldman talking doll say? Bloom, any ideas? Now, I think you already have an autographed copy, but any ideas from you, Bloom?
Yeah, see, I mean, this is going to be a doll for ages 8 and up or 6 and up. So
no, I think 18 and up probably.
See, now if it's 18 and up, now we can get into some of the real Matt Waldman sayings. So, I mean, what comes to mind right away, I've got to be honest with you. Most of the things that are coming to mind, I really can't share. So, and every time I try to think of something I could share, I realize, no, I can't share that either. But I'm sure that everybody out there will have some good things. I probably something to do with fresh fish. That's one I think. I think I can hear fresh fish, something like that.
Now we got so many friends of the Audible out there. If anyone could ever make this doll,
oh wow!
and
then what we'll do is we'll go into toy stores like the old Culture Jammers used to do, and we'll take the voice box out of the Matt Waldman doll, and we'll put it in like the talking Barbies and stuff like that. The people will go home and go, "Mommy, I got a Barbie!" Like, look at the way that he sold that shoulder fake in the hole.
I was going to say something about hip swivel, but yes,
Yeah.
We're going to get this viral. Waldman talking doll.
I think if we get a G.I. Joe doll and like actually put gray on it and put a little cap behind it and some plaid pajama bottoms, I think you're in good shape at that point.
Yeah. Dr. Gene, we stumble across gold once in a while. This Waldman talking doll thing. It's a hit already. It's a hit with the fans.
Can we make the doll snore? That would work for me.
Yes. The Matt Waldman road trips. You better have the earplugs. You better either that or be able to sleep through anything like I can. So get your earplugs out. Get ready to go. Let's do some Twitter questions before we get too caught up in the Matt Waldman talking doll. Dr. Gene rejoining us now. It's the Audible Live Thursday nights right here, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Dr. Gene, some Twitter questions. Take us around the loop here before we're out of here.
All right, so I'm going to give Bloom 2 questions. So I'm going to start with him and then come back to him simply because they're questions I want the answers to. One of them I sort of asked him earlier today, and another one he asked me earlier tonight, and I want the answer. So I'm going to make the first one the one you asked me earlier because I think it's probably a quick response, Bloom. Is Jordan Reed worth holding on to if you're in a 10-team league, PPR or not?
Probably not. I mean, if it's someone like, I'll say this: is Travis Kelce on your waiver wire? Is Dwayne Allen on your waiver wire? If those guys are on your waiver wire, no. Who's your other tight end? If the waiver wire is picked clean and you don't have another tight end in a 10-team league, if you're looking at the waiver wire and your only choices are going to be Mercedes Lewis or Larry Donnell or something like that, I suppose you have to hold Reed because he still has a lot of upside. He fits really nicely in what they were going to ask him to do, especially with RG3 lacking confidence. And again, I would expect that RG3 is going to hit those receivers that come open first in progressions. That should be Jordan Reed. But in a typical 10-team league, I think you can probably let him go.
Yeah, I think you're looking for upside in that situation, and we just don't know where Jordan Reed is. Now, if those guys aren't on your waiver wire and you've got the luxury to wait and see what Jay Gruden says next Monday, that's one thing. But for now, if you can get those players, I agree. I think I'd move on there. So we'll let Cecil get settled back in. Matt, Den Jr. 10 wants to know, is it too soon to drop Victor Cruz? But more importantly, is there any hope for this New York Giants offense? Are we going to see Eli Manning and Victor Cruz hook up? What's going on with Ruben Randall? And go ahead and throw some information down about Larry Donnell if you like. Is there anybody here that we're going to be able to trust? Is this going to be a buy low situation soon? What do you think about Victor Cruz and the rest?
I kind of like what I saw from Larry Donnell. I don't think he's going to be a high-end option for you, but if you're desperate for a tight end, why not? Because he came close to making some really nice plays in the red area, and the fact that Eli Manning was confident in him was a pretty good thing, and he showed some athleticism and some decent hands, maybe not great hands, but still, I mean, somebody that's going to get targets. I do think that Victor Cruz is someone you still want to hang on to unless you can somehow combine him with somebody else to make a trade. I don't think you should drop him outright and not get anything for him in return because it's week 1. You need to wait at least a few weeks here. This is a new offense. Eli Manning might be notoriously slow to pick up a new offense because has he really had a new one in the past few years? Yeah, there we go. We got the love enforcer thing going on here from Cecil. I couldn't find it. I cleared out all my photos from before that. But I would say that when you look at yeah, there we go. You got to hold it up a little bit higher. There it is.
There you go.
Sigmund Bloom, the voice of Sylvester Stallone. See, there we go.
And rolling his eyes like that. I love that right there.
See, we got it.
The bearded stranger, man. I love that.
The bearded stranger. So, I think that you got to hold on to Victor Cruz. I would say that I am scared for this offense overall. It doesn't look good for them long term, but I think that it's still something that can get. It is week 1. It should get better to some degree. And I wouldn't want Eli Manning at all, but I do think that he will find Cruz and things should get a little bit get on the right track to at least some point that you could look at Victor Cruz and say, I'm confident in him as a wide receiver 3.
All right, I think that I'm not the radio host here that's a killer segue person, but I think that kind of segues nicely into a question I wanted to ask Cecil. It comes from Chris Morgan at Fantasy Sophist. The Giants would be on this list for me, but other offenses you're worried about after week 1, possibly Baltimore would have fallen into that list until they showed up a little bit today. Torrey Smith not necessarily having a good game, but the running game's a little bit better. They certainly move the ball a little bit better. Any other offenses that are on your list to hopefully come off the list after week 2?
Well, it's 1,000% the Giants for me when I read that question. And I knew that we were going to talk about the Chiefs based on what Adam Teicher told me earlier today, but it's got to be the Giants. It's got to be Eli and company. Just such a sign. You've got Rashad Jennings on his own set of skills doing his own thing. In a way, Rashad Jennings is the Giants' version of Le'Veon Bell, where he's a runner, he's a receiver out of the backfield, he's a larger back, and he's just doing his own thing. The rest of the offense around him stinks in parts. Concerned about Cruz. I'm concerned about Odell Beckham Jr., and it may be an Isaac Bruce situation for him where Bruce, when he came into the league, he was so bothered by hamstring injuries, didn't really do much. But once he got going, then you saw that he could become a star. So for me, that question easily a system I was so excited about because with Kevin Gilbride stuck in the 90s with those ISO routes and the option routes as well, you knew something needed to change. And Gilbride himself knew it. I felt so good and refreshed about Grandpa Coughlin and the Giants when Gilbride essentially stepped aside and said, things have got to change, it's got to be me. And it wasn't working. We talked about the Steelers being stuck and how Lance Zierlein says football is really changing. You've got to change with it. The McAdoo system, rewind, go to the podcast center and go to our footballguys.com page and listen to me talk about the Giants. Man, McAdoo and hey and Cruz and look what Jarrell Jernigan did at the end of last year. And Odell Beckham Jr. is a stud if he's healthy. And now he's not healthy, and we're not seeing much from the Giants offense. So for me, easily the G-Man.
All right, Bloom, one more question for you, and this kind of goes back to I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with the back end of one of my redraft rosters today, and I had a question about Isaiah Crowell, and I actually compared him to Bernard Pierce, thinking which one of these guys is most likely to have the highest upside in the back end of the roster, and I kind of felt like it was Crowell without much question, besides the fact what Pierce did today. I kind of agree that he's a sell high, but the question comes from Justin Kramer, which is at JCAUSDC. How can people watch the video of Terrence West and Isaiah Crowell and come away with the idea that West is a better player than Crowell? I know certainly if you've read the RSP, we know what Matt feels about this. Is there any comparison here? Where do you think things are going to be? We talked a little bit about where Ben Tate may be after a month or so. What's the likelihood? Is there a percentage chance that you'd put on it? We know Terrence West is maybe likely to get a little bit more touches than Crowell. What's the chance that flips before Tate comes back?
Yeah, and Matt and I have discussed this on the phone and just our off-the-record conversations. And I do think that one of the things we have to work with here is that, and it's a sort of a subset of the assumption of rational coaching, in so much as obviously this Cleveland staff really likes West. And they aren't going to be so quick to just incorporate into their understanding, well, Crowell offers so much more than West. And the thing is, I will say this, I was a West detractor. I did not see it really on film. And in the game against the Steelers last week, what you did see is basically, I think, what the Browns were looking for when they drafted him is maybe not a polished runner in terms of decision-making and vision, but for a big, thick back, some juice in his legs, some ability to break tackles, good effort in his runs, and that results in a lot of runs getting to the second level. And West was solid, but he's better than Bernard Pierce. I mean, West is a better running back than Bernard Pierce. I feel comfortable saying that. But Isaiah Crowell, and this is something people need to think about, and I felt a little bit of remorse that I didn't emphasize this in the waiver wire report this week, that if we look at the full range of outcomes for Isaiah Crowell, and it could just be something like, Terrence West nicking up his ankle or something in a game so that Crowell gets to finish out a game. And we could easily see Isaiah Crowell at that point, because if you watched him last week, what you see is that he's just so thickly built, and he's got that short stride and that good base, and he doesn't, I think it's telling that he wasn't prepared to play last week. He wasn't part of the game plan. He wasn't going to play last week. And they put him in there, and he's a natural. I know that's a real shorthand, overused way of describing something. He is a natural. So if you're talking about season-long ceiling, Isaiah Crowell could be the guy we look back on and say, that was the pickup of the year. That was the guy, not Josh Gordon, not that Cleveland Brown, because Crowell could be one of those guys. Now, it will take a West injury or West egregiously, fumbling the ball 2 times in a game or just running up the back of his blockers or something like that. West will not see, partially because I think the team really likes West. But you're going to see this being a fluid situation. I think it could get to 50-50 with Crowell getting the carries in the red zone, like what we saw last week against the Steelers, the red zone carries, but instead of 16-5, something more like 12-10. I don't think West gives up this job without there being some intervening factor for now, but Crowell is good enough to make us revise that in a few weeks.
And there you have it. Isaiah Crowell, the most naturally talented runner in this draft class. And I think all 4 of us will be shaking our heads when that is spoken. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night right here, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. We love talking about football. Dr. Gene Bramall, you can follow him on Twitter @GeneBramall. Gene, are there any favorites coming through with #Waldman Talking Doll? Because I have one.
I haven't clicked over to the hashtag yet. I just have people telling me that whatever it is, it's going to be something sophisticated, which I think makes sense.
I love that.
If they only knew.
I have you all conned.
Yeah,
unbelievably so.
I love this answer. What would Matt Waldman, #Waldman Talking Doll say? Just says Paul Richardson. So again, for our listeners, if you're listening to this on the Audible, go to YouTube, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM, and then go to the end of the show and you can get this picture. Look, you got Dr. Gene Bramall, Dr. Chupacabra. This is of course, courtesy of Five-ish. Look at that. Oh yeah, nice. We got Sigmund Bloom and Matt Waldman, the bearded stranger, and Bloom is the voice of Sylvester Stallone. So this will be autographed and sent to you.
I've got one that I can suggest, but I won't really suggest the whole thing so that someone else could possibly do it to win it. But let's just say that Gene Bramall's version of this guy is Brandon Graham. So he always says free Brandon Graham. Now think of the guy, you have to go back a few years, but I would still probably talk about him today. And if you say free and it's the correct player, that could be added to the list.
That would be the list.
Well, since we're past we're probably about 2 hours. I do want to interject here really quickly, and I won't provide too much context, but I want to tell you guys that I was having a conversation with Dr. Gene, just one of our off-the-record conversations, and we were talking about a subject that made Gene, I'm going to make him blush, that made Gene utter the phrase, "Okay, this is the deal with me," and I almost fell out of my chair.
I didn't cry, though.
He didn't cry, but in the 9 years that I've known Dr. Gene Bramall, I've been waiting 9 years for him to say that. To just say, okay, this is the deal with me. So, but the contents of that conversation will remain locked under key in the lock or something.
Until we get to Vegas and I ask you.
Maybe. Okay, probably.
Bloom has loose lips, Dr. Gene. I will just let you know. Sigmund Bloom's lips, loose lips.
Yeah, that happens.
I've got my ways with Bloom. We share a room in Vegas. So.
I chatter.
Beach
schnapps.
Beach schnapps.
Beach schnapps.
That's always the key. He's Sigmund Bloom, and it's good to see you smile after our Steelers wet the bed.
Yeah, that's putting it light. That's a better report card than I would give them.
Matt Waldman always gets good grades because he's awesome. Matt, final thoughts.
Go Browns? I don't know.
There we go. That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. We get a little punchy when we get around that 2-hour mark. Thank you all very much. We love you guys. Love, love, love you all for listening to the show, participating with us on Twitter, at Gene Bramall, at Sigmund Bloom, at Matt Waldman, at Cecil Lammy, and at The Audible. Love it. Thank you. As always, stay tuned and stay frosty.